The sun was setting over the jagged peaks of an alien forest, casting long shadows across the mossy ground. The air shimmered with a faint green glow, as if the planet itself breathed life into its surroundings. A lone human man named Arlin wandered through this strange wilderness, his boots crunching against the soft, spongy terrain. He had come to explore these mountains on Zyrax 7, a distant world known for its peculiar ecosystems and uncharted territories. His mission was simple: gather data about the flora and fauna, but he hadn't expected to stumble upon something, or someone, so unexpected. As he climbed higher, following the sound of a bubbling stream, Arlin heard faint sobs echoing through the trees. At first, he thought it might be some exotic bird mimicking sorrowful sounds, but when he pushed aside a curtain of glowing vines, he froze. There she was, a woman unlike any he'd ever seen. Her skin shimmered like liquid silver under the dim light, her eyes large and luminous, reflecting hues of violet and gold. She sat cross-legged beside a freshly dug mound of earth, her delicate hands clutching a handful of flowers that seemed to hum softly in her grip. Arlin hesitated, unsure whether to approach or retreat. But curiosity got the better of him, and he stepped forward cautiously. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tentative. She looked up, startled by his presence. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, two beings from entirely different worlds meeting in the most unlikely of circumstances. Then, wiping tears from her shimmering cheeks, she spoke in halting yet melodic tones. "My name is Zyra," she said, her words carrying a musical cadence. "And no, I am not okay." Through broken sentences and gestures, Arlin pieced together her story. Lyra's husband, Kale, had been killed days ago by a massive predator native to the region, a creature called a vortac, known for its razor-sharp claws and insatiable hunger. Kale had ventured out alone to hunt for food, leaving Zyra behind in their small shelter nestled among the rocky cliffs. When he didn't return, she searched for him until she found his remains scattered near the edge of the forest. Heartbroken, she buried what little remained of him near their home and had spent the past few days mourning his loss. Arlin felt a pang of sympathy for her. Though they were strangers separated by species and galaxies, grief was universal. He knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "That must have been awful." Zyra nodded, her luminous eyes brimming with fresh tears. "I don't know how to survive without him," she admitted, her voice trembling. "He always protected me, taught me everything. Now," she trailed off, looking helplessly at the makeshift grave before them. Arlin glanced around at the dense foliage surrounding them. This place wasn't just beautiful, it was dangerous. Predators lurked in every shadow, and the environment itself could turn hostile without warning. If Zyra stayed here alone, she wouldn't last long. Something stirred within him, a mix of compassion and determination. He couldn't leave her to fend for herself, not after hearing her story. "I can teach you," he offered suddenly. "Survival skills, I mean. How to hunt, build shelter, find water, all the basics. It won't bring Kale back, but maybe it'll help you feel stronger." Zyra blinked at him, surprise flickering across her face. "Why would you do that?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "You owe me nothing." "Because no one should have to go through this alone," Arlin replied firmly. "Besides, we're both stranded here in our own ways. Maybe helping you will give me a reason to keep going too." For a moment, Zyra studied him, her piercing gaze searching his expression for any sign of deception. Finding none, she finally nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "I accept your offer." And so began their unlikely partnership. Over the next several days, Arlin dedicated himself to teaching Zyra everything he knew about surviving in the wild. They started with fire building, using dry moss and flint-like stones he'd scavenged earlier. Zyra watched intently as sparks flew from the friction, igniting a small flame. She clapped her hands excitedly, her laughter ringing like bells through the forest. "It's alive!" she exclaimed, reaching out to warm her fingers over the crackling blaze. Next came hunting. Armed with a spear fashioned from sharpened wood and metal scraps from Arlin's pack, they tracked smaller animals through the underbrush. Zyra proved surprisingly quick to learn, her natural agility allowing her to move silently despite her unfamiliarity with stalking prey. On their third attempt, she managed to spear a rabbit-like creature hopping between ferns. Her triumphant grin made Arlin chuckle. "Not bad for a beginner," he teased, patting her on the back. But survival wasn't all fun and games. One afternoon, while gathering edible plants near the stream, they encountered a swarm of insectoid creatures buzzing angrily overhead. Their stingers glinted menacingly in the sunlight, and Lyra shrieked as one grazed her arm. Arlin reacted instantly, grabbing her wrist and dragging her toward the safety of a nearby cave. Once inside, he inspected the wound, relieved to see it was only superficial. "Don't worry," he assured her, applying a poultice made from crushed herbs. "These guys are more bark than bite." Despite the occasional mishap, Lyra's confidence grew with each passing day. She learned to identify safe drinking water, weave sturdy ropes from fibrous plants, and even fashion traps to catch larger game. Yet, as practical as their lessons were, there were moments of levity that brought them closer together. Like the time Arlin tried to explain Earth jokes to her, only for her to tilt her head quizzically at punchlines involving animals she'd never seen. Or the evening when Lyra attempted to mimic his accent, resulting in a string of hilariously garbled phrases that left them both laughing until their sides hurt. Still, beneath the surface of camaraderie, emotions simmered. Arlin found himself captivated by Lyra's resilience and grace, qualities that shone brighter with every challenge they faced. And Lyra, though hesitant at first, began to see Arlin not just as a teacher but as a friend, and perhaps something more. Their bond deepened during quiet nights spent gazing at Zyra 7's twin moons, sharing stories of their respective worlds. Arlin told her about Earth's bustling cities and vast oceans, while Lyra described the crystalline forests of her homeland, where trees sang melodies carried by the wind. One fateful morning, however, their peaceful routine was shattered. As they ventured deeper into the mountains in search of new resources, they stumbled upon signs of recent destruction, a trail of uprooted trees and claw marks gouged into stone. Arlin's stomach churned as he recognized the unmistakable evidence of a vortac's rampage. "We need to be careful," he warned, gripping his spear tightly. "If one's nearby, we don't want to attract its attention." Lyra nodded, her usual calm demeanor replaced by nervous tension. They pressed onward cautiously, sticking close to the rocky walls for cover. Suddenly, a low growl reverberated through the air, freezing them in their tracks. From the shadows emerged the beast itself, a hulking mass of muscle and fur, its 6 glittering eyes fixed hungrily on them. Without hesitation, Arlin shoved Lyra behind him, raising his spear defensively. "Stay back," he ordered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The vortac let out a deafening roar, charging toward them with terrifying speed. Arlin sidestepped just in time, jabbing the spear at the creature's side. It roared again, swiping at him with claws that narrowly missed tearing into his flesh. Panic surged through Lyra as she watched Arlin dodge blow after blow, sweat dripping down his face. Summoning every ounce of courage, she grabbed a fallen branch and hurled it at the vortac's head, distracting it momentarily. Seizing the opportunity, Arlin drove the spear deep into the creature's chest, eliciting a final, guttural cry before it collapsed in a heap. Breathing heavily, Arlin turned to check on Lyra, who stood trembling but unharmed. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern etched across his features. She nodded, tears streaming down her face once more, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. "You saved me," she whispered, stepping forward to embrace him. Again. In that moment, something shifted between them. The gratitude in Lyra's eyes mirrored the admiration in Arlin's heart. Neither spoke of it aloud, but the connection they shared transcended words. As the days stretched into weeks, their relationship continued to evolve. They became inseparable companions, navigating the challenges of Zyra 7's untamed wilderness side by side. Yet, lingering doubts haunted Arlin. He knew eventually his mission would end, and he'd have to leave Lyra behind. Could he truly walk away from the woman who had come to mean so much to him? For now, though, such questions remained unanswered. Together, they forged ahead, bound by trust, friendship, and the promise of hope amidst the chaos of an alien world. Arlin stood at the edge of the clearing, his heart heavy as he gazed upon the small shelter nestled among the rocks. It had been days since he last saw Lyra, and though he told himself it was just a temporary departure for work, a necessary return to fulfill his duties, He couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that settled in his chest during their separation. When he finally returned, the sight of her waiting for him brought an unexpected warmth to his soul. Lyra stood there, her shimmering form radiant under the twin moon's glow, a smile spreading across her face so wide it seemed to light up the entire forest. Her eyes sparkled with uncontainable joy, and she practically ran toward him, nearly knocking him off balance as she threw her arms around him in an enthusiastic embrace. "You came back!" she exclaimed, pulling away slightly but keeping her hands on his shoulders as if afraid he might vanish again. "I wasn't sure. I mean, I hoped you would, but—" She stopped herself, laughing softly at her own rambling. "Never mind. You're here now, and that's all that matters." Arlin chuckled, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "Of course I came back," he said warmly. "Did you think I'd leave without saying goodbye?" Lyra tilted her head thoughtfully, her expression softening. "No, but sometimes people do things they don't intend to explain later." There was a fleeting sadness in her voice, one that hinted at scars left by Kale's death. But then her smile returned, brighter than ever. "Come. I made something special for you. Well, not special, but, well, you'll see." She tugged at his arm, leading him toward the cozy little campsite they'd built together. A fire crackled merrily in the center, its orange glow casting dancing shadows across the rocky walls. On a flat stone beside the flames lay what appeared to be roasted meat skewered on sticks, rabbit, judging by the smell wafting through the air. "I've been practicing," Lyra announced proudly, gesturing to the makeshift feast. "Remember when you taught me how to hunt? I caught this one myself yesterday. And I even tried seasoning it with those herbs you showed me. Do you think it tastes okay?" Arlin raised an eyebrow playfully. "Only one way to find out," he teased, sitting cross-legged on the ground as she handed him a stick laden with perfectly cooked meat. He took a bite, savoring the flavors. The rabbit was tender, infused with the earthy aroma of wild herbs, and surprisingly delicious. "This is amazing," he declared, genuinely impressed. "You've got a real talent for this." Lyra beamed, clearly pleased with herself. "Good. Because I wanted to make sure you'd have a proper meal after your journey. Traveling must be exhausting." "It is," Arlin admitted, leaning back against a nearby rock. "But coming back here makes it worth it." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds being the crackle of the fire and the distant chirping of nocturnal creatures. When they finished, Lyra leaned forward, resting her chin on her knees as she looked at him expectantly. "So, tell me everything. What did you do while you were gone? Did you discover new places? Meet other humans? Fight more vortacs?" Arlin laughed at the rapid-fire questions. "Slow down, or I'll forget where to start," he joked. Then, settling into a comfortable position, he began recounting his adventures. He told her about the treacherous cliffs he'd scaled to collect samples of luminous fungi, the strange floating jellyfish-like creatures he'd encountered in a hidden valley, and the peculiar tribe of insectoid beings who communicated entirely through rhythmic vibrations in the ground. Lyra listened intently, her eyes wide with fascination. Occasionally, she interrupted with curious questions or witty remarks that made him laugh. In turn, she shared stories of her own, the mishaps she'd faced trying to set traps, one of which accidentally caught a particularly grumpy porcupine-like creature, the time she discovered a patch of glowing mushrooms that sang when touched, and the evening she spent staring at the stars, wondering if he was looking at them too. As the night wore on, their conversation grew deeper. They talked about their fears, their dreams, and the weight of loss that lingered in both their lives. Arlin confessed how lonely he often felt traveling between worlds, never truly belonging anywhere. Lyra nodded understandingly, sharing how Kale's absence still haunted her, even as she worked to rebuild her life. "But meeting you," she said softly, her gaze meeting his, "it's given me hope again. Hope that maybe happiness can exist after pain. That maybe I can learn to trust someone new." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Arlin felt his throat tighten, unsure of how to respond. Instead, he reached out, gently brushing a strand of silvery hair from her face. "You've already shown me so much strength, Lyra," he murmured. "And kindness. I'm lucky to know you." For a long moment, Neither of them spoke. The fire popped quietly, its embers glowing like tiny suns. Then Lyra broke the silence with a mischievous grin. "Well, enough of this serious talk. Let's play a game." "A game?" Arlin echoed, raising an eyebrow skeptically. "Yes. I used to play it with Kale sometimes. It's called What If. You take turns asking each other questions starting with what if, and no matter how silly or impossible, you have to answer honestly." Arlin smirked. "All right, fine. You go first." Lyra tapped her chin thoughtfully. Okay. What if you could live anywhere in the universe? Where would it be?" He pondered the question for a moment before answering. "Probably somewhere peaceful, with lots of greenery and open skies. Somewhere I could build a home and stay put for a while." He glanced at her pointedly. "Maybe even here, if the company's good." Lyra blushed faintly, ducking her head to hide her smile. "My turn," he continued. "What if you could change one thing about Zyra's 7? Anything at all?" She didn't hesitate. "I'd make it so no one has to lose the people they love," she replied earnestly. "Not to predators, not to accidents, not to anything. Life feels fragile enough as it is." Her answer struck a chord within him, and he found himself nodding silently. Their game continued late into the night, filled with laughter, absurd hypotheticals, and moments of quiet introspection. By the time they finally retired to their respective sleeping spots, the bond between them felt stronger than ever. Yet, as Arlin lay staring up at the swirling constellations above, a nagging thought crept into his mind. How long could this last? His mission wouldn't keep him on Zyra's 7 forever, and eventually, he'd have to leave, not just for a few days, but permanently. The idea of saying goodbye to Lyra filled him with dread, but he pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the present moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and perhaps new reasons to stay. For now, all that mattered was the warmth of the fire, the sound of Lyra's gentle breathing nearby, and the knowledge that, for the first time in a long while, he felt truly alive. The days that followed were a blur of laughter, shared meals, and quiet moments under the twin moons. Arlin and Lyra's bond deepened with each passing sunset, their connection growing stronger than either had anticipated. They spent hours exploring hidden corners of the forest, discovering secret glades where bioluminescent flowers pulsed in rhythmic patterns like living hearts. They swam in crystal-clear streams, their reflections rippling together on the water's surface. And yet, despite the joy they found in each other's company, an unspoken tension lingered between them, a shadow cast by the inevitable. One evening, as they sat beside the fire, roasting strips of fruit-like pods that oozed sweet syrup when cooked, Arlin finally broke the silence. "Lyra," he began hesitantly, his voice softer than usual, "there's something I need to tell you." She turned to look at him, her luminous eyes reflecting the flickering flames. There was a pause, as if she already sensed what was coming but didn't want to acknowledge it just yet. "What is it?" she asked, her tone light but tinged with apprehension. Arlin took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I have to leave soon. Not for a few days this time, but for good." The words hung heavily in the air, sharp and final despite his attempt to soften them. Lyra froze, her hand hovering over the skewer she'd been turning over the fire. For a moment, she said nothing, her gaze dropping to the ground. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're leaving for good?" He nodded, guilt twisting in his chest. "My mission here is almost complete. My team will be calling me back soon. They're preparing to depart Zyra's 7. Once they do, I'll have to go with them." "But—" Lyra's voice wavered, and she looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "But you promised you'd come back last time. You came back then. Why can't you stay longer now? Or bring me with you?" Arlin reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I wish I could," he admitted, his own voice thick with emotion. "But my world, it's so different from yours. It's chaotic, crowded, full of noise and rules I don't think you'd understand. And your world, it's beautiful, Lyra. Wild and untamed. You belong here. With your forests, your skies, your freedom. And you belong there, she countered, pulling her hand away slightly, though not entirely breaking contact. Her voice carried a note of frustration. Is that what you believe? That we're meant to live apart because our worlds are different? It's not about believing, Arlin replied, shaking his head. It's about reality. I can't ask you to leave everything behind, not after everything you've been through. And I can't abandon my responsibilities either. Lyra stared at him, her jaw tightening as she processed his words. Finally, she let out a shaky sigh, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. Then promise me one thing, she said firmly, her voice steadying. Promise me you'll return. Not tomorrow or next week, but someday. When things settle down. When you can find a way to make it work. Arlin hesitated, torn between honesty and hope. He knew how unlikely it was that he could ever come back, not with the vast distances between their planets, not with the demands of his life on Earth. But looking into Lyra's pleading eyes, he couldn't bring himself to crush her completely. Instead, he gave her the only answer he could muster. I promise I'll try, he said quietly. No matter what happens, I won't forget you, Lyra. I swear. Her expression softened, though sadness still lingered in her gaze. That's all I can ask for, she murmured, offering him a small, bittersweet smile. For now. The days leading up to Arlin's departure passed far too quickly. They filled their remaining time together with as much laughter and adventure as possible, trying to push aside the looming goodbye. Lyra showed him a new trail that led to a breathtaking waterfall cascading into a pool of iridescent water. Together, they carved crude symbols into the bark of a massive tree near their campsite. Symbols representing their names intertwined, a mark of their bond that would endure long after he was gone. On his final morning, Arlin packed up his belongings, his movements slow and deliberate. Every item he tucked into his bag seemed to weigh more than it should, burdened by the knowledge that he wouldn't need them anymore once he left Zyrax. 7. As he secured the last strap, Lyra approached, holding something in her hands. For you, she said softly, extending the object toward him. It was a small pendant made from polished stone, etched with intricate patterns resembling the constellations above. It's a reminder of this place, and of me. So wherever you go, you'll always carry a piece of Zyrax 7 with you. Arlin accepted the gift, his throat tightening as he examined the delicate craftsmanship. Thank you, he managed to say, slipping the cord over his neck. I'll treasure it always. Lyra nodded, forcing a brave smile despite the tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. Be safe out there, Arlin. And remember your promise. I will, he vowed, stepping closer to embrace her. She clung to him tightly, burying her face against his shoulder as if trying to memorize the feel of him before he vanished forever. For a moment, neither of them moved, savoring the closeness they both knew might never be repeated. When they finally pulled apart, Arlin cupped her face in his hands, brushing away a stray tear with his thumb. Take care of yourself, okay? Keep practicing those survival skills. Who knows, you might end up teaching someone else someday. She laughed weakly, nodding. Maybe. But no one will ever teach me the way you did. With one last lingering look, Arlin turned and began walking toward the horizon, where the transport ship awaited him. Each step felt heavier than the last, his heart aching with every stride that took him further from her. Behind him, Lyra stood motionless, watching until his figure disappeared into the distance. As the ship ascended into the sky, carrying him away from the alien planet and the woman who had changed his life, Arlin gripped the pendant around his neck, closing his eyes against the swell of emotions. Somewhere deep inside, he vowed silently that this wouldn't be the end, that somehow, someday, he would find a way to return. Until then, he carried Zyrax, 7, and Lyra, with him, etched into his soul as surely as the stars were etched into the pendant. Months passed after Arlin's departure from Zyrax, 7, but the memory of Lyra never faded. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing day. Back on Earth, surrounded by towering skyscrapers and the ceaseless hum of technology, Arlin found himself longing for the simplicity and beauty of the alien world he had left behind. The bustling streets felt suffocating compared to the open skies and untamed wilderness of Zyrax, 7. Even the people around him seemed distant, their lives consumed by trivial pursuits that paled in comparison to the profound connection he'd shared with Lyra. At night, lying awake in his cramped apartment, Arlin would trace the pendant she had given him with his fingertips, imagining her luminous smile and the sound of her melodic laughter. He replayed their moments together, their hunts, their games, their quiet conversations under the twin moons, and realized something he hadn't fully understood before. Lyra wasn't just a part of his past. She was a part of him now, woven into the fabric of who he was. And living without her felt like trying to breathe underwater. The turning point came one rainy evening as Arlin sat alone at his kitchen table, staring blankly at a stack of mission reports he was supposed to review. His mind kept drifting back to Zyrax, 7, to the forest, to Lyra standing beside the waterfall, her silver skin glowing in the sunlight. Suddenly, a thought struck him so powerfully that it made his chest ache. What am I doing here? He pushed away from the table, pacing the room as the realization crystallized. He didn't belong on Earth. Not anymore. His heart was no longer tethered to this world, it was rooted somewhere else entirely. On an alien planet, with an alien woman who had taught him more about love, resilience, and purpose than anyone ever had. That night, Arlin made a decision. It wasn't going to be easy. Leaving Earth meant severing ties with everything familiar, abandoning his career, and facing countless unknowns, but he knew it was the right choice. For the first time in months, he felt a spark of hope ignite within him. He began making plans, researching ways to secure passage back to Zyrax, 7, selling off possessions he no longer needed, and drafting letters to explain his absence to friends and colleagues. Each step brought him closer to the life he truly wanted, a life with Lyra. When Arlin finally returned to Zyrax, 7, his heart pounded with a mix of excitement and fear. What if she had moved on? What if she didn't feel the same way anymore? These doubts gnawed at him as he navigated the dense forest, following the trail that led to the clearing where they had once lived together. But when he emerged into the familiar space, all his worries dissolved in an instant. There she was, Lyra, standing near the fire pit, her back turned to him as she tended to a pot bubbling over the flames. Her shimmering form caught the light of the setting sun, just as radiant as he remembered. Before he could call out to her, she must have sensed his presence because she turned suddenly, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Arlin," she whispered, dropping the wooden spoon she'd been holding. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, frozen in time. Then, with a cry of joy, Lyra ran toward him, throwing herself into his arms. He caught her effortlessly, lifting her off the ground as she laughed and cried simultaneously. "You came back," she said, pulling back slightly to look at him. "You really came back." "I told you I'd try," Arlin replied, brushing a strand of silvery hair from her face. "And here I am. For good this time. For good." Lyra echoed, her voice trembling with emotion. "You mean?" "Yes," Arlin said firmly, cupping her face in his hands. "I've left Earth behind. This is where I belong now, with you, Lyra. If you'll still have me." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she nodded vigorously. "Of course I will," she choked out, pulling him into another fierce embrace. "I waited every day, hoping you'd return. Hoping you'd choose us." "Us," Arlin repeated, savoring the word. "I like the sound of that." In the weeks that followed, Arlin settled into his new life on Zyrax, 7. Together, he and Lyra rebuilt their home, expanding the small shelter into a cozy dwelling filled with warmth and laughter. They explored the surrounding wilderness hand in hand, rediscovering the magic of the planet they both loved. Slowly but surely, Arlin adapted to the rhythms of Zyrax, 7, learning to live harmoniously with its unique ecosystem and embracing the freedom it offered. Their bond deepened even further as they envisioned a future together. One evening, under the glow of the twin moons, Arlin knelt before Lyra, presenting her with a ring fashioned from polished stone and metal scraps he'd gathered during his travels. "Lyra," he said earnestly, "you've given me a second chance at happiness. Will you marry me?" She laughed through happy tears, nodding emphatically. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Their wedding was a simple yet beautiful ceremony held in the glade near the waterfall. Friends they had made during their adventures, both human and alien, gathered to celebrate their union, sharing stories, songs, and laughter beneath the starlit sky. It was a moment of pure redemption, a testament to the idea that love could transcend worlds and defy odds. Years later, their family grew. 2 children, a boy and a girl, were born, each inheriting traits from both parents. Their son's skin shimmered faintly like Lyra's, while their daughter's eyes mirrored Arlin's determination and kindness. Together, the 4 of them built a life filled with love, adventure, and purpose. Arlin often reflected on how far he had come since those lonely days wandering Earth's crowded streets. He had found not only a home but a family, a reason to wake up each morning with gratitude and joy. And Lyra, too, had found peace, her grief over Kale softened by the knowledge that love could bloom anew, even in the most unexpected places. As they stood together one evening, watching their children play near the waterfall, Arlin slipped an arm around Lyra's shoulders. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he mused, gazing out at the horizon. Lyra leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Yes," she agreed softly. "But we're exactly where we're meant to be." And for the first time in his life, Arlin knew it was true.